I really want this to kind of work as a back and forth. We've got panelists here who are willing and able to answer your questions. I'm not going to give too much information because I'm going to let them all introduce themselves, but we have a wealth of knowledge on this panel in different professional and personal ways. So we'll just kind of get started. Like I said, they're going to each kind of give like a few minutes of what they think is important for you to know about either their story or their profession. And then we're going to open up for questions. But if they say something that sparks a question in you, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Feel free to raise your hand. This is the time everybody's an open book in here, so this is the time you get all your questions answered. So let us know what we can do. And I apologize for having to make something while we have this because I'm in every session today. So that's the way it goes. Go for it. I'll let you start.
I'm Stephanie Aiken from Adoption and Beyond.
Sandy Kriegel, I'm an attorney here in Kansas City. The firm's called Kriegel & Kriegel.
And the clinic for domestic adoption.
Carolyn Johnson, adoption foster care.
I'm Bill Johnston, adoption and foster care.
And we're going to see Carrie, whose picture is up first? Tonight, it's Anne. So Anne gets to share her story first.
Well, okay, so I'm going to try to do this without crying. It's pretty fresh for us. My husband's not here. He's in Pittsburgh, so he would not know very well. But we live in St. Joe, so he's not taking care of our baby. And that had two beautiful stepchildren. Second marriage. And so I have kind of a generational gap there. We have a 20-year-old Zachary, and that's my stepdaughter Ivy. She's 18. And then Ellie, that was when she was 2 months. She's 8 months today. And so it's been quite a journey. Same situations, dealt with infertility problems for 10 years. Was a foster mom at one point. Just basically, long story short, only options were either egg donation or adoption. And so just felt the Lord was just really calling us to adoption, and just really felt domestic was the way to go for us as prior experience. So we used a local agency here in Kansas City, and they say, you know, it can take 2 years. We started the process, let's see, November of 2013, and it takes a few months to gather all your paperwork, create your book, all that good stuff. So by the time we did all that, it was 6 months, and then we got called 6 months later on August the 6th of 2014. She was born August 25th, so on our anniversary. So that was pretty cool. So we had 3 weeks to prepare. I will say adoption is the most wonderful thing that I've ever done, but it's also the most hardest thing I've ever done as well. Adoption and the open adoption, and most agencies use open adoption nowadays, and it's still depending on what your work mom is comfortable with. And so there's all kinds of dynamics with that. You know, I'm still learning. She's 8 months. I haven't perfected this by any means, but it's the greatest thing. She's been the blessing. I will say this, little effortless in there, that my husband has biological children and adopted child. There's no difference. I can't honestly testify to that, but there's no difference in the love that he has. I know people struggle with, is it time? Do you see more? Is it treatment? Do adoption? But truly, the love that he has, whether it's biological.
What agency do you use?
Adoption option.
Do you want to put the next slide? I'm pretty sure it's Carolyn will.
You gotta help her.
I don't usually speak publicly like this, it's usually a one-on-one, so I'm kind of nervous, so forgive me. I'm thankful that we've been invited to share, and our hope is that God will help any or all of you along on your journey as you seek to grow your family. on down the road, we learned that they'll also have infertility problems. I had surgery, for my endometriosis, and the doctor put me on birth control to control the endometriosis and the ovarian cyst. Over about the first 5 years of our marriage, I went on and off of birth control, hoping I would get pregnant. That never happened. And then after we purchased our first home, we got more serious about getting pregnant, and we went to KCIA Medical Center, to the infertility clinic. Is that what it's called? So, we were taking some medications at first and getting pregnant naturally still, and that didn't work. So we moved on to an artificial insemination. We got pregnant our first try, so that was pretty exciting. We were nervous about doing that first case, but we did. And then we miscarried at 6 weeks pregnant, and that was very difficult. It took us 2 years before we decided we tried again. So we tried the artificial insemination again, and I got pregnant for the third time. And then we miscarried at 5 weeks. So by this point, I'm getting older, my clock is ticking. Yes, let's do it again. Yes, it was hard, but I wanted to try. He was not ready to go down that road again. And so I prayed for God to change his heart or to change my heart. And God ended up changing my heart. And I learned to be content in the barrenness. And we decided that we would invest our lives in serving in missions on foreign ground and serving in our church. And then while I was serving on the mission field in 2010, I was serving in a children's home in Peru, and God knocked on my heart to adoption and to show me in Scripture that, yes, this is what I'm asking you to do. And so we had, in 2005, we had actually started the process of foster licensing through the state, but our mission work interfered with our classes. And so it was kind of like, as we were following the Lord in our lives, he was closing that door at that time. So anyways, in 2010, when God, it was like he was giving me a dream that I had my whole life, and I gave it to him, and now he's giving it back to me. I was there by myself, my husband was not with me. I was overwhelmed and scared.
I'm gonna go.
It's his turn.
Thank you.
He was watching it a bit, Carolyn, I could see it, he was like,
I do that.
Oh, 5 minutes is enough.
Well, I did want to interject one thing, is that when I didn't want us to go back through infertility treatments, that's because I was heartbroken because she was heartbroken. And it was hard for me to see her deal with the miscarriage. And guys that are in here, if you've dealt with that, I get it. Because what I did was I would cram it all down and think, oh, I'm not going to deal with this, it'll just go away. And it didn't. And so I always had a desire to have children, as you see, and I never thought we'd have that picture. But I was more concerned about her and her well-being, so I said, we're just done doing this. I just said, we're just not going to do it anymore. I didn't want to see her hurt, and quite frankly, I didn't want to see me hurt. And sometimes it's hard for guys to say, we're tough, no. That's not it. When your wife goes through something like that, you don't want to see her go through that. So what we did was, we watched for God. And I'm a gospel pastor, so you're going to hear us refer to God. We're people of faith. And I watched God do amazing things. And we prayed for children, and then we had an encounter at a church. We were at what they call a trunk or treat thing, and it was in October, and we ran into some older friends of ours that had raised kids on their own and done all those things, and then an opportunity for them to adopt arose, and they took it. And so through that, watching them, we kind of said, well, let's maybe do this adoption thing again. Am I doing it right?
Well, we have been.
I'm no dummy.
I'm the
Smart man,
detail
smart man.
person. I'm the detail person. We had specifically that morning prayed for
Right.
God's direction of which path we should take. Should we do foreign adoption? Should we do domestic adoption, private, foster care again? You know, we've been down that road, got to the door, we weren't sure. And the family that we ran into, they were foster parents. They had become foster parents. They were 50 years old. But they had two little girls that they were fostering now, and it was just kind of like, is that really dying straight that quickly?
Well, then we began taking the steps in that direction immediately. And we got licensed in July of 2011. And on the very day that we received that email saying that we were notified that our licensing was complete, we got an email just minutes later stating that 2 sisters were up for adoption. And I remember my wife clearly saying, God, those are our kids. And I remember our licensing worker at that time said, well, you've never been foster parents before. You've never been parents. That will never happen. And my bride goes, you don't know how big my God is. And as a pastor, I say that stuff because that's what they pay me to say. No. There has to be a little levity, you guys. But I remember her saying that, and that brought more faith to me that, wow, this is something that's real. We may have kids someday. You know, I'm 40 years old. And I'm going to have little kids. So Carolyn sent me an email immediately and said, hey, these little girls are up for adoption. And I just remember saying, yes. And she was hesitant because I went, okay. I went from not wanting to see her standing on the side of the shore going, I don't want to do this, to going, okay, let's go. And she was hesitant, but she kept reading the bio and reading the bio and reading the bio of the little girls, our little girls. I can say that now, our little girls. And I'm the favorite. But she was shocked. Yes. But she was shocked that I wasn't hesitant. I was ready, and she was more hesitant. And you know, I'll just tell you, we saw God move mountains. Again, you know, this is supposed to take 6 months, this process, to do all these things that we have to do after licensing, excuse me. And it took 3 months. I mean, that again was something you're like, well, this isn't ever going to happen. Then God takes something that takes 6 months and takes it into 3 months. And I mean, just all the things that happened, we just kept trusting the Lord. And I remember the day that I got the phone call, I was actually in Brazil because I didn't think that we were going to get our kids so soon. And I'm with about 15, 20 other people. And my wife calls me and says, oh, the girls are here. Oh, that's nice. Are they there to visit? No, they're here forever. And I said, okay, I'll be there in 3 days. Easy. I told her 3, it was 6.
From 0 kids to 2 kids overnight, it was very overwhelming. And it was.
But as Ann said, and Carolyn, you know, we've kind of said it is, because when I got the girls, I was over 40. And all my friends are having, your kids are graduating. And I know I'm taking too long.
You're fine, I'm not
Okay.
worried.
Thank you.
We do have an attorney down here. He might get angry if he doesn't see me.
I got you, brother. I'm almost done, but one thing I just wanted to say is that, you know, I ran into one of my friends from high school at a local Quick Trip, and he said, hey, Billy said, is that your grandkid? And I said, no, that's my daughter. And he said, oh, you started late? I said, I wouldn't change a thing, Todd. And he said, well, she's beautiful. And I said, you're right, she's mine. Thanks, Dad.
I know what Andy said, it's the hardest thing that I've ever done, but it's also the most rewarding thing that I've ever done.
And just in closing, I'll just tell you, you know, if you're thinking about it, it'll change your life. And it's not always going to be easy. You know, we were talking to some of the adoption ladies out in the hallway, and you know, when we first got them, we thought, oh, Christmas is going to be great. It's their first Christmas. We're going to spoil them rotten. And both of our kids were sick. So it wasn't what we wanted. It was like, well, this this isn't fair, these kids are sick, it's ridiculous. But you know what? You can overcome all that, and you're there for, my eyes are leaking. That happens. But you're there for them because our kids kind of came out of a really bad situation. And it's nice to just look them in the eye and just let them know that they matter, like all you matter, and that you love them. I mean, when my little girl gets in my face and goes, I love you more than Snickers. I'm like, that's right. So I gotta be done. So
How old were the girls when they came to live with you guys? I can't remember.
they were 15 months and 4. Isn't that right? So,
Are you guys done with foster then? Or are you still?
As far as we know,
yeah.
we are open to if the girls have siblings, if their siblings come up, then we're open to adopting their siblings.
And we've talked about maybe doing other things. We've never said no all the way to foster because we don't want to close the door that we might be able to help somebody else.
We honestly, I knew God was calling us to adoption, so even, we were kind of pressured into doing foster and adoption license, but I just knew that our call was adoption, and the first case we got our kids. And I just thought, we decided until we adjusted to being parents, we weren't gonna take any more children, so right now we're like.
All right, Sandy, like I said, with Stephanie and Sandy, I have just kind of given them free rein to tell you whatever they think you need to know about either from a legal perspective or from an agency perspective. And we'll just go from there.
Picture.
Oh, we do. Carrie?
First of all, I'd rather Stephanie go because this is a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. My name's Sandy Kriegel. I've been doing adoptions in Kansas City pushing 40 years, so it's been a long time. I've been involved in many thousands of adoptions. Some of them have been very simple and straightforward. Some have been very difficult and are contested. What I'm going to focus on today are the different types of adoptions, and each of you may have a different impression of what an adoption is, but there's lots and lots of different kinds of adoptions. There's lots of problems that can come up with adoption. There's lots of good things, as you've heard, about adoptions. I'm not going to focus on the good stuff. I'm going to focus on some of the legal issues and some of the ways that you might think about stepping your toes if you do an adoption, because it isn't always real simple and straightforward. If it was real easy, I'd starve to death. Not something that I have a vested interest in making it complicated, but it is, by its nature, some cases are very, very complicated. Many people, when they think about adoption, they're thinking about adopting a healthy newborn. And that's significant. There's significant numbers of adoptions that fall into that category, although there's lots and lots of folks that adopt foster kids. And there's a huge need in the greater Kansas area, especially on the Missouri side. How many of you live in Kansas? And how many in Missouri? The rest of them. So I'll focus more on Missouri, but if you have Kansas questions, you can always ask me later. Jackson County, most of you? How about Missourians? How many of you in Jackson County? Clay, Cass, what other counties? Platte. Okay. Those are all counties where there's very significant amounts of adoption being done in the foster care area. There's 2 agencies now that are at contract with the state of Missouri that do licensing. Midwest Foster Care and Adoption Association is one, and the other is Missouri Baptist Children's Home. They've both been around for quite some time. They're both very good organizations. I'm on the board of Midwest Foster Care and Adoption Association, so I have no prejudice towards them. But you would need to pick one of those 2 agencies to do your own study. The great thing about doing foster parent adoption is that there's no cost involved. You do need to be willing to be a foster parent. You pay a very nominal amount of money to be a foster parent. And when your child's placed in your home, there's no guarantee that it's going to end up in adoption. Sometimes a child will be placed in your home, and the social worker will tell you, I'm certain that this child is going to be available for adoption in the next few months. And the social worker's wrong. Even though her intent was good. And the flip side can happen. I'm sure that the mom and dad are going to get their act together. The social worker may tell you, if you're looking to adopt in foster care and that this child staying with you for less than a few months. And there is a different story for every different child. So foster care is something that you really need to look into, think about carefully. A lot of those kids have lots and lots of issues, and most people are concerned about the issues involved in adopting kids in the system. These kids are all kids that have been abused or neglected and then taken away from their parents for some reason. But as many people can tell you, it's extraordinarily rewarding and it's great. Adopting a healthy infant is an opportunity that comes up sometimes, and Stephanie can tell you a lot about that. It's an excellent agency, and we do a lot of infant adoptions, and it's definitely 20 years. And I'm not sure that we've done thousands together, but I bet we've done dozens or hundreds together. And there's a lot of good folks in Kansas City that do infant adoptions. There's international adoptions, which is totally different. Step-parent adoptions. Probably most of you aren't here today because you're thinking of step-parent adoptions. There are a number of gay and lesbian couples these days who are doing second-parent adoptions. There's various arts kind of, you may be going to some of the other seminars that are involved in assisted reproductive technology. We've been doing a lot of what are called embryo adoptions in Kansas City for the last many years, and those have worked out very well. And then there are adoptions. Any of these adoptions can end up being contested, where birth mother rejects, a birth father rejects, a grandparent intervenes, and we can talk about those to the extent that we want. Some of the key issues that you need to be aware of is that there's all kinds of issues regarding interstate placements of adoption, especially involving foster kids, so that can be an issue. If you're adopting an infant, interstate's an issue, but it's nothing you should be terribly concerned about. It works fairly quickly, but with the border being so prevalent in Kansas City, many of you who live in Missouri may end up adopting in Kansas, vice versa. So make sure that you get hooked up with an attorney that knows what an interstate adoption is. There is a law, a federal law called the Indian Child Welfare Act, and I don't want to make you experts today on that, but my advice on that is that a child that you hope to adopt has any Indian heritage or is eligible for membership in a tribe, then you need to be cognizant, your attorney needs to be cognizant that that is a potential issue. There's all kinds of federal rules that you got to jump through. We've been involved in, I'm sure, many hundreds of ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, that's the acronym that is thrown around. Many hundreds of those kinds of cases, and we've been successful in all of those. That doesn't mean that we haven't gotten on our knees and growled with the tribes, but working with the tribes can be a little bit of a hassle, and if it's something that you're of the faint of heart, think carefully about whether you want to get involved in a child that has Indian heritage. One of the good things about adoptions is that there is a federal adoption tax credit. Usually when you start talking about people about tax issues, they're trying to start yawning, but this is something where you can save up to $13,400 if you adopt in 2015. That means that's the date that the adoption would be completed. And the way that the adoption tax credit works is it's no longer refundable. Several years ago, you used to be able to get that full amount back from the feds if you adopted. Now it only pertains to those people, the only people that are eligible to get that credit, is you have to have an adoption completed in a certain year, in 2015, let's say. Your income needs to be below a certain level, and that level is a little over $200,000. So if your family income is substantially over $200,000, you're not going to be eligible for it. Substantially over $200,000, we don't be concerned about the credit. Would be the flip side of it. But you have to have taxable income that you can use. You have to have tax liability that you can use against the credit. So if you pay federal income taxes, you'll be able to take advantage of the credit. If you don't pay $13,400 in federal taxes in any one year, you can't use it all in 1 year, but you can So many of you, if you're involved in an adoption that costs $10,000, then you're eligible for $10,000 worth of credit. Can't use it all in 1 year, you can carry it forward. It's more complicated than that, and if you have questions about the credit, I'm happy to do that, but I'm seeing some people yawning.
For foster care, regardless of whether you spent anything, you still get the full tax credit.
So, not to pry on their personal situation, but they adopted 2 foster children, hopefully they got good tax advice, and even though they may not have spent a nickel, you were entitled to whatever the credit was in that year that you got the adoption. But this year, if you adopted 2 foster care kids, you'd be entitled to $26,800 of credit. I've had clients.
I don't know how that's my fault, but it is. Thanks for bringing it up.
Sometimes if you don't earn enough money, you can't take advantage of the credit. But like a lot of tax laws, it's the people who have more money sometimes that are able to take advantage. But that's another issue for another time. Let me take just a couple more minutes. Let me give you the problems that come up in adoptions. And you will not face all these problems, but just from having done it for so long, you kind of get to figure it out. When you're dealing with birth parents who are very immature, there are big issues. And sometimes you can be dealing with a 30-year-old who's very immature, a 30-year-old birth mother. Usually, though, it's like a 16-year-old birth mother and her 17-year-old boyfriend. Very often, they're focusing on their relationship. He may be very interested in the birth mother and not so interested in the baby, or vice versa, meaning that she may be more interested in him than the baby. When you're dealing with really young birth parents, it's really important to have good social work. So I'm looking at Stephanie. There are a number of really good social workers, and the birth parents need a lot of handholding, and you need to make sure that you're hooked up with somebody that really knows how to effectively deal with birth parents. Sometimes there's a possibility of multiple birth fathers. Attorneys call those putative fathers. But if a woman's had relationships with more than one guy, it creates a number of interesting legal issues, to say the least. Just kind of have your radar up for that. It's not something that comes up in every case. Every once in a while, a woman will say the birth father is Joe, he's been my longtime boyfriend, and when the baby's born, it's clear by the race of the child that Joe is not the birth father. So birth mothers don't always tell you the truth either. Birth mothers change their minds. Good social workers, though, who are working with birth mothers are very, very good at predicting which birth mothers are reliable or unreliable. It's always good to hire a social worker who has some gray hair. Maybe you don't have gray hair, but who has lots of experience. Maybe I should say it that way. Some birth mothers conceal their pregnancy. They just feel like they can have the baby. We see that all the time where there's a birth mom from Omaha who comes to Kansas City, she's working in restaurants, is partying too much, she inadvertently gets pregnant. She thinks she's going to place the baby, and her folks, who she doesn't talk too much in Omaha, will never find out. But what happens is Edith is shopping on the plaza one day from Omaha, didn't tell. The birth mom, that she was in town, we run into her, she's 8 months pregnant, and she says, "Oh, I'm so mad at your mom." This is what Aunt Edith would say. "She never told me she was going to be a grandmother, so congratulations." One thing leads to another, birth mother changed their mind. So birth mothers who don't talk to their ministers, that don't talk to their family members, those are potential problems. Birth mothers who are in denial, we'll see that with some frequency, where birth mothers say, "You know, I'm just carrying this baby for you. This is not my baby, it's your baby." It sometimes makes prospective adoptive parents very happy to hear that. It's not a natural reaction. A good social worker will tell you that birth mothers are in denial, not birth fathers and mothers are always a big issue. Birth fathers sometimes profess to be very involved and very interested, and sometimes they are, but by and large, birth fathers are very often motivated by their mothers.
no potential that they were the actual biological father, but they still had to be involved in the adoption. There was one of the birth moms that we worked with did conceal her pregnancy from extended family, not from her immediate parents, but she just didn't want to talk to any of her friends and family. So like all of those issues are stuff that we had come up in our adoptions, and we still had a successful adoption. So I don't want that to scare you off, just hearing some of that. I mean, you do have to be very realistic, and that's one thing I preach is that you need good social workers and good attorneys. I'm a clinical social worker by license, and one of the things that was super important to me when we were interviewing attorneys was just somebody that was going to make sure all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted, because I would run into some attorneys who wouldn't, and that's not a situation you want to get into. So,
The percentages of people that the birth mother picks the paper rather than adopted parents, then once that has been picked, what approximate percentage is there that goes through? Is it?
It's very high. Again, I don't want to scare you away, but you will know at the inception of whether it's going to be a high risk or not a high risk adoption. If you're working with a social worker who knows the lay of the land and you're working with an attorney. And I'll tell a client at the very beginning, hey, this adoption looks really good to me. I see very few issues. I'll do just the reverse, saying, hey, you may have a good chance, but there's this issue with the birth father, there's this issue with the birth mother, you could have an Indian Child Welfare Act issue, and you always want to be in a position to say, hey, thanks, but no thanks. If you feel like you got to walk away from the situation, you should. We'll have lots and lots of other clients who are willing to risk, but it is not for the faint of heart in some situations. Most people who stick with it, though, are successful. I mean, our success rate is well into 90%, on the average adoption. But I'll be able to tell you at the beginning, after talking to a social worker who's worked with a birth mom, whether I think you got problems, and if so, what the problems are. We're, after doing it for a long time, you get pretty good at it.
Are the costs like all beginning, or is it kind of spread out? Or
Well, it's all over the board. It's from zero to you can spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000.
I mean, is it like upfront costs?
Most of the time, yes. Most of the costs are upfront. Sometimes it's spread out.
If they
over
back
the
out, you're stuck with a lot of costs.
Yes, you can very often, not necessarily all, but you do get the federal adoption tax credit even on a failed adoption. So if you get involved in a case and you've got $10,000 worth of upfront costs, there is an excellent chance if you apply, you don't make $500,000 a year, but if you're making less than $201,000 a year and you have federal tax liability, you may be a lot more interested in taking the risk because you know you can emotionally deal with it, or maybe you know you can't emotionally deal with it, but if you can, federal adoption tax credit works for unsuccessful adoptions.
I want to say something here, because you have to be really careful what agencies that you use, because there are some agencies that are out there that will take advantage of couples, I believe. So you definitely want to shop around, because if you're doing a private domestic adoption, because it can range from 50,000 to 10, and so make sure you research as much as you can. And that's kind of like my goal with all couples, because I've seen so many couples spend thousands and thousands of dollars. And where, you may, there's some agencies you can get a baby within 3 months, you may throw $40,000, $50,000, or wait a year or two, not so much. So just depending on what you're willing to do as a couple, individually, just be very cautious, because it's a very vulnerable time, you struggle with infertility, you finally get to that decision of adoption, and you just want that baby more than anything. But it's so easy just to go in a huge amount of debt, but just be wise. Like you said, find a social worker, find an attorney that are going to advocate and know what they're doing.
And to find someone with experience, even through us, even though the way we did it, you still have to have someone that knows what they're talking about. Not as, that's done it for a while. And our adoption was contested. We found out that there was a extended family member that was in
was after we were selected as the forever parents, after our test, or interview, I called it.
Adopted resource.
Yeah, but our attorney had the wherewithal, and he knew exactly what he was doing, he'd done it for years. And if, she just said, if they're good parents, I don't wanna basically stop what they're doing, and she backed off. So we did have a contested adoption at one point, it lasted, you know, when we found out from start to finish that it was contested, it was like a week and it was gone, so.
Is that normal to have a week of contested, or can they do it 2 months, even months?
Well, their situation is very fortunate. Usually when I refer to a contested adoption, it's a birth parent that's contesting or somebody files a competing adoption petition. They tend to be much more involved, much more expensive, and it can take 6 months to a year to work through a contested case. Again, there are contested cases that I think have a very high probability of being successful, and there are contested cases that are 50-50. You need to sit down with your attorney and social workers and figure out whether you have a very high likelihood of winning or a very low likelihood.
Okay, Stephanie will come in.
Okay.
You went through 4 children before you finally adopted?
No, well, our first situation was really strange. My husband's sister was pregnant. She ended up passing away after delivery. She wasn't married. Well, she was married, but not to the father. They had been separated for a long time. And he was willing to sign. Her father had some mental health problems, was not his own decision maker. He and his parents, who were his decision makers, decided adoption was a great thing. They wanted us, they knew us, we were going to keep them in a baby's life. I mean, she was our niece, she's still our niece. And his aunt and uncle came out of the woodwork and said, you can't place this baby for adoption. Absolutely not. We will take, do everything. They took the birth father in the and that's who took the baby. That was our only one. The second situation was a private situation. She contacted us in April by word of mouth. We were registered with an agency at the time. By word of mouth, contacted us, and he was born in June. And there was a birth father, a legal father, and a boyfriend. And that one, she was our birth mother. I mean, we had an amazing situation. We still keep in contact with birth grandma. So, yeah, we didn't go through 4. No, I would have, oh my goodness, I would have been losing my mind. But through that, the first adoption situations, we took care of the baby in the NICU. We brought her home from the hospital because we had to. The hospital wouldn't release her to birth father. And through that, I learned, like, I would never do that again. I would have had an attorney that we were working with before we brought her home from the hospital to say, these are red flags. We need to step back and we need to look at that. And through all of that, I'll give Sandy a plug. My aunt in Tennessee called me and she's like, this lady from my church says you need to call Sandy Kriegel and ask him if this is even going to go anywhere. And so I hadn't even heard Sandy's name before then, so I did. I called him and he was gracious to talk to me over the phone and kind of gave me the lay of the land. And then actually we ended up with our private situation, Adoption and Beyond, with Rachel as our birth mother social worker through that. So there's kind of a connection with both people. But KCIA, we do have adoption agencies that we have experience with, and we do have attorneys that we recommend. And we will never recommend somebody that we wouldn't have complete confidence in, that would see you guys to a successful outcome and give you the whole scoop on what to look for.
Okay, I'm Stephanie A., and as it's been indicated, I'm one of several agencies here in Kansas City, so I'm very thankful to be asked to speak today. I am also an adopted mother. I started out in the adoption field, and I actually started Adoption Beyond about 16 years ago. My life's been touched with adoption. My niece and nephew are adopted domestically, and then my husband and I adopted one of our 5 children from foster care. She was 8 when we adopted her from Kansas foster care. So a little bit about myself, and I handed out an outline of the 6 different types of adoptions. When a family comes to our agency, we offer free consultations. So we sit down with families and talk with them about the different types of adoptions, the cause, the time frame, the process for all 6. So families can walk away and say, I think this is the right avenue. And whether that's with us or not, that's great. Just, we want families to be educated when they come and walk away with figuring out what the kind of adoption is best for them. As an agency, we do have a domestic program. So we primarily work with birth mothers who are voluntarily placing their children for adoption. So the contested stuff we usually don't find unless it's usually a birth mother issue, because our birth moms are voluntary. going to have, you've probably done a lot of research online, and there's just a lot of information thrown at you, and we just try to bring it down into 6 simple categories. And those are going to be domestic agency adoptions, and that's when a birth mom's pregnant, comes to the agency looking at placing her child for adoption. She looks at family profiles. She can see anywhere from 3 profiles to, I've heard of agencies doing 100 profiles, but typically it's going to be more around 12 profiles, somewhere around that. And she chooses a family that she would like to have a match meeting with. And you get to meet the birth mom, and you both get to decide whether you want to work together or not with each other. Then once a match is made, you move forward, we get the attorneys involved, the birth father involved, we get the different pieces put together of the adoption, the hospital, and different things like that. Depending on what agency you choose to work with, your domestic adoption can be anywhere from 20 to 40. It's a pretty average range of an agency adoption, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. That's typically what you're going to find the range of costs are. Then there are, on the next page, there are referral and facilitators. You probably, if you've done your research, you may have heard a lot of negative things about facilitators. We do work with a few, or our families do. There's a few reputable ones out there. There's also a category called referral resources, and what they do is they kind of act as a middleman, they kind of act as the in-between, and they help connect you with the situation. So they share your portfolio with several different agencies throughout the United States. So they become your advocate in helping you find a situation. And those adoptions with referral facilitators, you're going to find they're on the 30 to 40,000. They're on the higher end of the spectrum. But so far, we've typically found families get placement within 4 months. So it's one of the faster options for families to pursue. When you look at an agency adoption, depending on the agency you work with, it can be anywhere from 2 days to 2 years. Some agencies are faster, and that you usually find a correlation between higher cost and quicker placement. And the direct reason for that is because a lot of agencies literally spend millions of dollars advertising because there's so few birth moms who are considering domestic adoption for their children. That's the way they find birth moms and bring them into their agency. And those advertising dollars get passed on to the family through agency fees. So that's why there's that correlation in your research. So. Then there are private adoptions. Private adoptions are done 2 different ways. One, you can have just word of mouth. Family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, let everybody know you want to adopt. You'll be surprised where someone knows someone who's next door, neighbor's best friend's niece is pregnant. It's how random it is. We find the largest sector actually end up happening privately. It's been our experience with adoption. You also can have your portfolio with an attorney, and attorneys will sometimes do matching with birth mothers as well. So that's how you can have a private adoption. Most of our potential birth parents are on Facebook, and so you can find that you get a lot of, you do your own self-networking, you may find your own resources of a potential birth mother. And then you get a social worker and attorney involved once you find a potential match.
So for the private adoption, the costs are a lot less. Our adoption was around $8,000 total. We were back when you got everything refunded for your adoption, so we got the refund, and we did get the refund for the cost for our failed adoption too, so.
Yeah, we find private falls around $8,000 to $12,000,
Yep.
what we typically find. So. Then there are embryo adoptions. Embryo adoptions are around $10,000 to $15,000. It can be on, is everybody kind of familiar with what embryo adoptions are? Okay. That's, just in case you don't, that's where a family has gone through IVF, they have frozen embryos left over. They are done building their family. They view these embryos as life, and they don't want to destroy them, so they'll donate them to a family. And there are a couple of larger embryo programs, the NEDC and Nightlight, and you can get matched with potential what are called genetic families with embryos that way. And it can get up to 15 if the procedure doesn't work the first time, and because you have to go through the medical procedure again. But the home study is just a basic domestic home study that you have prepared that stays static. That isn't that's not a cost you lose when you look at other potential transfers. So that's embryo adoption. And then there is foster care, which we've heard about today. And then that also brings us to the last category, which is international adoptions. International adoptions fall between 20 to 45,000, so it's not much of a difference between domestic adoptions as it used to be. We find that domestic adoptions are just much more expensive nowadays. And with the information I gave to you has a list of international agencies. The list of countries next to that is not current. That is ever flowing, ever changing. Countries are opening and closing. And international adoption can take anywhere from 12 months to 3 years, depending on the country you choose to work with. And And you do not necessarily need to have, there's very few local international agencies here in Kansas City, so you don't necessarily have to have a local agency here. You can just have a home study done by a licensed agency here in Kansas or Missouri and work with an international agency that maybe is in Washington, for example.
So if we would like to adopt a child from whatever country, and they end up closing, and you're in the middle of the adoption, how does that work?
Then you can switch to another country, but you lost your time and you lost your money, and it's a definite risk when you look at international adoption.
And how does that work with the taxes? I'm assuming you didn't get, it didn't go through, so it's all failed.
You know, that's a good question. I haven't been asked that one before.
With the international, I don't know either.
You don't get the tax credit for a failed international.
Do you get the tax credit for a completed international adoption?
So those are the 6 different types of adoptions, and
Brandon, do you have a question?
Yeah, question. Do you find that embryo adoption can be an easier way to adopt a child without having that birth mother, or father coming back saying, hey, because these folks have already made that decision to adopt?
That's a good question. I find that there are, from what I understand, there's more the genetic family still chooses you, so it's still kind of a profile choosing process. So
Okay.
that's what I found.
Okay.
And then there's the not getting pregnant.
And then, yeah, the
That's the-
chance
that's the different
correct.
risk that-
And yeah, and you're still losing that money, of course, that you put forward.
Once you get to the point that, you're pretty much doing IVF,
You're just doing a frozen, you're just doing a frozen
for a
retriever.
cycle, so one, they cut off rights at procedure time, I would assume.
I will let Sandy address this question.
Let me imagine that. I can tell you what we do here in Kansas City.
It is very different all over the United States.
There is, without getting too involved, in most states, Kansas, Missouri, have a statute under the Uniform Parentage Act that says the woman that gives birth to a child is the mother of the child, and the man to whom she is married at the time of birth is the father. The problem with that is that we have for years now been using gestational carriers, where a couple does in vitro, wife can't carry the child, and then we'll we'll hire a gestational carrier, a woman who acts as a surrogate who has no genetic relationship to the child. So the woman that gives birth to that child has no genetic relationship, and we'll go to court and make sure that the judge says, notwithstanding your Parentage Act in Kansas, Missouri, she is not the mother is the biological mother. So the reason I bring that up for dealing with embryo donations is that we are always very, very careful whenever our clients do an embryo donation, we go to court and we say, hey judge, even though my client gave birth to the child and her husband wants to be the father, they are not the genetic parents. We terminate the rights of the genetic parents, even if they live in California, and we do an adoption. So you end up adopting the child that you just gave birth to because you have no genetic relationship. And I'm convinced that we're doing it the right way in Kansas City because it just eliminates anybody coming back later on, because we have seen situations across the country where a genetic mom in an embryo donation changes her mind, and if she were to file a claim here, but we eliminate that risk, and we feel real strongly that's the right way to do it. So if you do get involved in embryo adoption, I really encourage you to use an attorney after the baby's born to do a formalized adoption. If you do the formalized adoption, we've taken the position, we've been very aggressive with the IRS, that you are entitled to the federal adoption tax credit. So a lot of times the adoption ends up paying for itself. That is a controversial position, and some attorneys and some IRS agents will tell you, no, that's not really the intent of the law. But our clients have been very successful in getting the adoption tax credit. That's probably more than you asked. Sorry.
Yes.
So, you guys, with your children, they came to you and they were immediately ready to adopt? Like you didn't have to go through the foster process?
We were already licensed, I got our foster adoption license, and their
imagine surely if they were choosing an adoption resource, I would almost imagine that their rights were already terminated.
They were, still trying to contact birth parents
So they had
and
to-
make sure, yeah.
It goes both ways. Sometimes
Right.
they are, sometimes they
We had to
aren't.
place the ad
Like,
and all that, because,
For the birth father.
yeah, there was no forwarding address for any of the parents, there was no, there had been some legal things on the birth parent's side, so they actually had to put an ad in the paper that's maybe saying, speak on this, that just says, hey, you're losing, or we're looking for you, we're gonna give your kids up to somebody else. I don't know how.
We had to do
I
that
don't
for
know how
our
to word
adoption too,
it.
even though the birth fathers had signed, or the birth father and the legal father had signed,
Right.
our attorney still did that.
And then, of course, no one ever came forward, but we had gone through all the classes and everything they teach you, and they inspected our home. I mean, we did the whole, when we decided we were gonna do it, we just started and did everything, so we were pre-prepared for the girls to come.
I'll just say, it is always a risk. You are always taking a risk.
Yeah.
But it's always worth it.
The family that was fostering your children, they did not want to try to go from the city?
No, they didn't. I thought that was strange. And I asked the birth family, or the foster family, why they didn't choose to adopt them, because they had them for so long. I mean, Jada was 1 month old when we lived in there. And they said they weren't being called to adopt, they were called to be foster parents. And some people, that is what they do, and this family is very good at being foster parents. Now, since then, they have adopted other
They
children
did adopt more.
that they fostered, and I wonder how my kids will feel about that when they're older, but. But it's just something I mean, we trust God to help us walk through that.
Did you maintain, do you have any kind of open relationship with the previous
We
foster
do,
parents?
friends with them on Facebook, at first it was once a month, then every 3 months, 6 months, now it's every year. We have play dates, just because they had other children, and, my daughter says, that's my daughter, that's my daughter. So they have that emotional connection, and it's something important to them.
And it's not straight, when you run into people in our community, we live close to them. I mean, we're within 2 miles of where they were. And so it's like we'll be out at something and we'll run into them. So it's not awkward, and they chose not to adopt them, and we did, and that's a blessing for us. But then they still get to see them, and like Carolyn may mention, they have adopted other kids since. But it just wasn't in the cards for them at that time. And, we all have different scenarios, and that's what ours was. So I don't know. It's good to run into them because they can talk, and it's not.
She was able to offer insight to situations where I was like, so it's been a blessing.
Those rights have already been terminated, then, or do you still have to do the law?
Depends. Are you going to third-party session? Next. Okay, that will be answered in there. Do you have a quick answer, Sandy?
Yes, sperm donation is different than all the other type of assisted reproductive technology, in that both Kansas and Missouri, most other states say that you're a physician and someone other than your husband is the sperm donor, and that person, the donor, is not considered to have any legal rights. Unfortunately, you don't need to use an attorney. There is a presumption that as long as your husband has consented, he is the father. So that's simple and straightforward. But that's
One other
the
question?
only thing.
From the time we are licensed as foster parents, how long does it usually take to get consent?
I know yours for just adoption or foster adoption? It's almost immediate. They are,
Like, as soon as you come out here, then you call, I would be foster parents. After you finish and you're licensed,
You can spend that day. That day.
Yeah, within.
But not all the children who come into foster care are free and available for it.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for doing that. But for us, I mean, we came home and it was like, there was a message, I think, on our machine that said, hey, we have this child. So
they need foster, I mean, Missouri
Yeah.
especially needs foster families, so if you go through it, you're gonna get a placement quick. Yes, one last question, then we're gonna wrap it up.
If you plan to foster to adopt, will they place children with you knowing that that's what your end goal is? They're not just gonna say, okay, here's a foster kid while you're waiting?
Yes
Or
and no.
just be prepared for whatever comes to you?
That's the best answer.
You have a list of questions you can ask, you don't have to take a placement. You can say no. If they, don't meet what you can handle, then you can say, no, I can't take that placement. And you don't have to tell them why.
We have a crazy situation in our church right now. We have a family, good friends of ours, who adopted through foster care a little girl. First mom ended up having again, baby was placed through foster care. This other family already has 3 children. They're like, we don't need another baby. We just adopted this one. So we found another family in our church to take that baby. His rights were, parental rights were just terminated by birth mom's choice this time. She chose after he was in the system for a while to say, I really like this foster family that he's with. We're gonna relinquish our rights and we're gonna let the adoption go through. Birth mom's pregnant again, so now we're looking for a 3rd family in our church to adopt this next, or to be ready, be prepared to adopt this next baby, because it's likely that it will go to adoption also. So your social worker would be able to tell you those kind of things about the situations too. If you're interested in foster to adopt, if you're interested in any of the kind of adoptions that they've talked about today, we have multiple people. I know people personally, but through the support group from KCIA that we can hook you up with. So if you want to email or go to dinner with somebody, just let us know and we'll hook you up with somebody to talk to. Melissa Bardwell is the one that did how to support your infertile loved one in the next room over. She is a foster mom times 3. She adopted 3 children at different times from foster care, had 2 from almost birth, newborns, and then she adopted 1 when he was 8. So if you have questions, just let us know. I want to thank you guys so much. I know an hour goes really fast, and I'm sure there's lots of questions, but thank you guys so much for being on.